Hey guys, what's up? Chris here, and today I would like to talk about studying. But first, a quote from Adam Robertson. Lean into every moment expecting magic. And while doing that, let's remember to do the fun stuff first. Next thing in line would be momentum. I'll give you some study ideas. Then I will be talking about recollection versus recognition. Another study idea, which is teaching it. And the creativity myth. But let's start off with the fun stuff first. Remember how we used to love to play and engage in things? Well, get interested in the topic you're trying to tackle. And if you aren't, reframe it so that it might become more interesting. Think growth mindset here. Where does this fall within the grand scheme of you? Maybe learning this specific thing or concept is not going to be interesting. Then reframing it could potentially make it interesting. But hey, what if I observe myself on how I'm handling a boring topic or something I perceive as boring, and then learn to grow and find ideas and ways to get interested in being present in the moment and immerse myself in anything I want to do. Start by exposing yourself to the most interesting facts first. The initial spark will set you up with a lot of momentum. As the old saying goes, and I don't remember the exact saying, it's something like, showing up is half the work or half the win already. So now let's go into momentum, because this initial spark will set you up to create momentum. Now, what is momentum? In a sense, momentum appears when you are in a state of flow, of effortless doing, or as Taoism would have it, non-action. You no longer need to force yourself to do something. Inertia is no longer a problem to be overcome. It does not exist anymore, or only in a very small capacity. The thing you're trying to do or you're doing is starting to become part of who you are. Here are a few tips that can trigger momentum for you and potentially get you over a hump that previously seemed to stagnate your growth. Initial push. At first, you need to invest some energy to create the initial push and movement. Later on, it will in part take care of itself, and less energy needs to be invested to keep things going. This is also what happens with habits, streaks, interest, and the initial spark. It's important to start very small to overcome the initial inertia that we experience. Start with the most interesting facts. Change your environment. Find ways to make study more enjoyable. Maybe have a playlist or a few study spots that you can go to do specific study. The change in environment will help with focus and enjoyment. You can also have your favorite beverage ready to pour before you go, so that you can zip from it while studying on a continuous basis. Like, for example, you could have a coffee already brewed and ready to go, so that whenever you feel like it, you can take a sip of coffee, maybe even close your eyes and really enjoy the experience. This will all tell your brain in a way that what you're doing is very enjoyable right now. And over time, your brain will become very accustomed to that, so that you will actually enjoy it much more. Mini rewards or rewards. The main reward is sometimes not so easy to see, as it will only come over time, but some smaller rewards that you can get right away might help you get through some of the tougher study sessions. What can those be? Well, something like, if I do 2 hours of study, I can go to the movies today as a treat, or go out eat at a nice restaurant, buy that book or thing that I wanted. You should probably be careful with spending too much money depending on your situation, but sometimes learning to link spending you would do anyway to an activity that benefits you greatly will have a profound impact on your bottom line. It might take a while until your brain recognizes the link. It is very individual after all. But having a pre-planned reward ready, you might find an extra spark of motivation to go at it, which is why you should make it something that you really enjoy. That's very important in my opinion. So, momentum is created when you do something that is initially hard, you make it a little smaller, and once you have that momentum, you've created a flow, a state of effortless doing where things are really not hard anymore. They're coming from the core of your being. You're losing time in what you're doing, basically. So break your study into chunked sessions. That's one of the study ideas. Instead of carrying the tree out of the forest, it will be much easier to chop it down and carry smaller pieces out, right? Don't you think so? Well, here's another study idea. And I talked about this one before. Know thyself. This is not just from Socrates. This is also, as I said in another video, at the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. To determine the size of your chunks, you need to be aware of your attention span. On average, people have about 25 to 30 minutes of good attention, but it's important to find your own. Maybe use this template to find out what yours is like and work really only with that. You can watch my video less to see why it can be dangerous to do too much. During your breaks, which can be around 5 minutes, but you can really test it out to see what works well for you and what type of break. But as I said in one of the videos, the break video, it's important to have quality breaks, not breaks that don't really refuel your brain. So you should spend some time away from your study area. I talk more about this, as I said, in the video Breaks and Habits. But in general, you want to flush your system with oxygen, blood, water, and create some form of calm inside. And potentially even stretch. Stretching is so important, or mobilization is so important for people that sit a lot, which, well, let's be honest here, we sit a lot. Unless, of course, you have a standing desk, which I recommend to all of us, or all of you. I do have one. Anyway, reward yourself consistently. Usually give yourself the bigger reward when your day of study is done. But during your study, your rewards can be things like having a nice beverage readily available, playing a nice song during a break, or calling a friend maybe. Things like that. Find out and make a list of some of the things that have worked for you in the past and things that you want to experiment with right now. Rewarding yourself in some form or another reinforces good study habits and builds up great study habits, which is exactly what we want. Before you study or when you start studying, write down your intentions. Because if you write down specific intentions, where, when, and what exactly you want to do, you're more likely to actually follow through on what you're doing, on what you're trying to do, and what you will do actually. So write down your intentions, also what you expect from this or that study session. For example, in this study session, I expect myself to understand better how to defend the big blind against an open and a 3-bet. And why I want to play a certain way in the pot post-flop. Starting. Aristotle said, well begun is half done. So just start. Get great at starting important tasks. Obviously also at finishing. But you will have nothing to finish if you never start in the first place. Anyone know what this picture or where this picture is from? It's from a movie. And in the 1989 movie Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner, He hears a voice in his field telling him, if you build it, they will come. A nice way to look at this would be that if you do something, don't worry about the results. Adapt if it's not working properly, and trust in the process of doing it. Be fully immersed in the process. This will get you to do lots of things that might have seemed impossible at first. Again, I would like to remind you of verse 63 from the Tao Te Ching. Act without doing, work without effort. Think of the small as the large, and the few as the many. Accomplish the great task by a series of small acts. Then, when you study, be actively involved. Make the material your own. The more actively you try to understand something, the more engaged you are, the better you will grasp the material at hand. To do that, you can ask yourself exactly what it is that I'm trying to do or learn here. Because asking this, your brain will go into hunting and exploring mode. You will try to find every possible way to connect new things with the old and add or put into context what it is that you're trying to learn. For example, say you want to learn a balanced way of playing in a 3-bet pot in small blind versus big blind, BVB. After asking yourself and coming up with this answer, you can now start thinking about which filters to use and then ask, for example, what is it that I could be missing here? What would be the most unbalanced play generally and versus specific opponents? While I'm a proponent of memory techniques, because we do need to learn quite a lot of facts and interact with them, within concepts, we are far better at learning and understanding concepts, and once we do understand them, they will stay with us. Also, at times, concepts are much more fun to look into and start learning the process. But once you know what it is and understand it, there usually is an amount of work to be done that, in fact, requires you to do and also remember lots of facts like ranges, ratios, pot odds, many things really. And if you think about it, many paths lead to Rome. That's something we say in Germany, but probably everywhere in the world. And it depends on the variables, including your starting point. These facts can start out in memory palaces, for example, and then once you own them, you don't need those memory palaces anymore, and can use the same palace to store new information, new facts that you need to learn, and learn it until you repeat the process again. Many people either don't know their ranges fully and use charts to play with, or they don't know what to do in specific spots because there are too many charts and specific things to find within them. At the table while in play, you don't have a lot of time to find the right facts and then be able to use them to think about the higher level concepts. That's where memory techniques and knowing facts come in, because they make things instant and help you not waste time on facts that you want to use for higher level concept thinking during hand. Reframe it, say it in your own words, because that's how you demonstrate that you fully grasp a concept. Just repeating what others said before you, well, it's a starting point, but it will not show you that you really understand it. Like in school, we need to test ourselves on what we know and what we don't know. And one way of doing that is by saying it in our own words. Remember the title of the first video, Write Your Own Book. That's what I was referring to really. By creating something yourself, even something that others have come up with, come up with before you internalize it and better grasp it. Like Picasso said, for example, good artists copy, great artists steal. So you just take something from someone else and make it your own. Of course, first you have to know what it is that is worth stealing. But in this sense here, we're more about reframing the idea of another to your style, to your own self, to who you are, you can still give the credit, and you should. Next thing, something that many people are not aware of: recollection versus recognition. What is recognition? When you study, you might see something in a hand like a concept, and because you've heard it before or have some basic idea about it, you sort of phase out and don't fully listen anymore. This also happens in discussions with others, especially when we might think our knowledge is superior to theirs. Be careful with that and be aware of when you have thoughts like that popping up in your head. They tell us something that we think we know, and now we can't wait to get across our point of view. That's why I have this picture of the Joker here, my turn. Because while they're still talking, we're already thinking about what we're going to say, how we're going to express our opinion, and when it's finally our turn to speak. But sometimes they will surprise us, saying something different or from a completely new angle or more in depth, and we're missing it completely because we were so focused on getting out our opinion, on getting our point across, and thinking about when it's my turn to say something. This same thing happens with ourselves when we're studying. We might not notice a weakness in our thinking, our game, or our process because it seems familiar. And this is such a huge trap, and we have to not only be fully aware of it, but take actual measures to avoid it. So instead of having the trigger of familiarity, have you phase off, stop, and think whether, in this case, watching a video or doing a review, for example, this really does hold true. If your conclusion is, yes, I know this fully, then quiz yourself quickly and say it out loud in your own words, because once you say something loud, it is much harder to deny whether you understand it or not. If you can't put it into your own words or answer follow-up questions and questions of more depth about it, then you're not good enough with it yet. So let's get a little bit into triggers. For recognition, you need something to trigger your thoughts, which you won't always get while you're playing. Say, for example, Sauce123 says something in a video and you go, yes, I know this. But upon quizzing yourself or trying to do the same in a review, you fail. Then not only are you not strong in this concept yet, but you will likely even miss the moments when it comes up in play. This is recognition. Recollection, on the other hand, is when you can come up with it on your own, though it can also be channeled through a trigger, but you don't necessarily need the trigger. To learn this and be able to not fall into common pitfalls, you need to do active learning. Something to do that is part of active learning is effective note-taking. When you watch a video, take notes, reframe the concept in your own words, and once the video is over, immediately flesh out your notes. Make them more potent. Be aware of concepts from the video that you think you understood well, and the ones that you think that you were weak in. Another benefit from this is that having such great notes, you will always be able to review them before a session and be aware of what it is you're working on. When you're doing a warm-up, for example, before your session, or any performance really, when you do that consistently, like for example reviewing your notes before a session, you will systematically improve and notice where you have weaknesses still and be able to address them properly, either by reviewing more hands of the type or going back to the point in the video or lecture where it was discussed. Learning less with higher quality and being able to apply the learned versus being aware of lots of things but have no real depth in anything is certainly preferred, I would say. Teach it. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. That's what Albert Einstein said. Teaching something forces you to dig deeper within your knowledge and not only come up with ideas on how to phrase something, but also look at it from a different perspective, from different angles. If you feel like you're not yet good enough to teach, or don't know how to find people to teach it to, just ask a friend. Someone that you think might be able to grasp the concept, if he would be willing to listen and to listen in while you're teaching it. And then later maybe even discuss how to implement this concept, not only in poker, but also in other areas of your life. Which forces you yet again to show the depth of your understanding of the concept is there. Sometimes you will understand the higher level concept, but you might lack the basic knowledge or the application of the basics that you have not used forever, and this might slow you down, for example. If you are aware or aware enough and have a system in place of taking good notes and regularly stopping, reflecting, reframing, and quizzing yourself, you will move towards your desired goal a bit faster than if you let things just happen randomly, which is not really what we want, right? I've already mentioned that we need a combination of understanding concepts and knowledge of facts in order to quickly assess a situation and make the best decision that we can with what we have available to us at this point in time. The best way to learn facts is using mnemonics, and memory palaces are only one small portion within this whole construct. There are many others, like for example, acronyms, coined sayings, and image associations. Memory palaces, wardrobes, and some other concepts I will be going over in a separate video though. An acronym is a short word that consists of the starting letter of many words from a concept. For example, can you give me an example? Can you think of something quickly? Maybe something that has to do with poker? Something comes to mind? Anything? Okay, I'll tell you. GTO, or GTO strategy. That's an acronym because GTO stands for Game Theoretic Optimal. CO, or HU are also acronyms. They stand for cutoff or heads up, and heads up. You don't necessarily have to use the first letter when you build an acronym, as you will be able to recall the information you're looking for, also using other letters from those words, because you engage with the concept and with creating the acronym, which is why you will always remember why you used the third letter from word X instead of the first one. Our brain is really quite amazing with this. Also, if you are a little inaccurate in something, but you did sit with it for a while, you will remember the correct thing or be able to adjust to the correct because you studied it actively. This is at times used in language learning, where you take a word from one language and look what sounds similar in your language, and then attach to the whole thing the true meaning of it. For example, the Portuguese word aprender means learning, but you could pretend it to be an app and a renter, which is someone that is trying to learn how to use apps. So he's an app renter. He wants to learn to use the apps before buying them. When you come up with your own funny but somewhat detailed stories, images, and ideas, flesh them out some, and you remember them forever. The only thing in your way here is really your own imagination, which you can build with just a little practice. Another great technique to employ while reading, for example, is called pseudo-skimming, where when you read a book, instead of reading it fully, you just skim every paragraph. And a way to do this with study and review, for example, would be to let a full table session run on autoplay and then stop once you find at hand you think you should go deep on. You can either have VPIP true on or some other filters maybe. Sometimes you want to look at your own game and sometimes at the game of others, how they played at the table, maybe in comparison to how they played on other tables or just in general. But let's talk about the creativity myth. We sometimes hear of the creativity of children and how amazing they are at that. Well, here's a little insight. Kids are not that creative. To be creative, you need knowledge. Because what you do when you're creative is you create new things or combine old things in a new way. For creating things or new things, you need imagination, but you also need knowledge. Kids do have imagination, but they usually lack the knowledge. But they lack another very, very important thing that us slightly older people have grown into during our education and being raised by our family and environment, which is they lack the knowledge of common rules of what to do and what not to do. For example, there was this birthday party where the parents also brought their children to hang out. And with parents, you never know or cannot ever fully plan how many are going to bring their children. So it turned out that there was one more child than was initially planned. And there was no seat for that child. So the child of the host went into the hallway and took one of those paper trash cans, emptied it out on the floor, of course, and turned it upside down for the extra child to sit on. Well, of course, the parents were very annoyed finding that their hallway got trashed, but they were also amazed at the creativity of their child. Well, this was in some way creative, but it was not really, because yes, the child figured out to use something hard and of a certain height to sit on, but the reason the parents found this to be creative was they would not have come up with this on their own. Because in their hand or in their mind, rule number 313C applies here, where you don't empty a trash can on the floor, which the child was oblivious to, and therefore the child didn't have a restriction or a restraint in their head to not do this. And that's why it's so important for us to not be limited by what we think should be done this or that way. That's why Yoda said you must unlearn what you have previously learned. And that's really the key here. We need to unlearn what we have previously learned because it quite often limits and hinders our growth. It stunts our growth because we think we cannot do something in a certain way. For example, let's talk about the 4-minute mile, I think it was. Nobody ever believed a person could, maybe it was a 4-minute or a 1 minute. No, I think it's a 4-minute mile. And yeah, people believed it could never be done until someone did it. And then all of a sudden, in the next year that followed, more and more and more people started running a 4-minute mile. Because now all of a sudden it wasn't impossible anymore. But when it was still impossible, people just didn't think they could do it. So they sort of limited themselves to something based on some arbitrary rule or idea that other people had. So please be aware that those arbitrary rules are quite often hindering you. You don't have to break every rule to do this, but you have to be aware that there is a rule right now happening in your head, and you should ask yourself, can I step over this line? Can I do something else if I don't think about this rule? Are there other ways for me to grow by creating something new? What if? Ask yourself, what if? All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, as always, let me know in the comments. And if you like the video, I would appreciate a like. It gives me a good feeling every time, but I don't want to sound too needy here, so whatever you feel Just do it. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.